Welcome back to the Iron Sights Podcast. I'm joined by John Humpton. He's the owner of Black Flag Armory up in Medford, Oregon. John, welcome to the Iron Sights Podcast, man.
Scott, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
I'm stoked to have you. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances for the first time in person, but we're not. We're here to talk about some of the things that some people may be highly aware of and others may be like, I don't really know. There's too much to follow. I can't keep up with it all. Specific to the permit to purchase laws that were just passed in the state of Oregon. And that is accompanied by a magazine limitation, a 10-round magazine limitation, which is not uncommon to see here in California. But we can talk about it and how that impacts you. So, John, again, thanks for joining us. I wish it was under different circumstances, but I can't wait to dig in because I know you have some things to say and you can really educate the listeners on kind of what's going on out there. So, talk to us about Black Flag first. Like, what's going on up there?
Right now it's sort of business as usual, right? Traditionally, we've tried to be a very customer service oriented, very different kind of gun shop that's really welcoming and really open to new shooters and really, trying to change up kind of a lot of the status quo and the stigma in our industry. And that's been really cool for us. And it's been really, really productive, but we're starting to see some different things happen, especially with the advent of, Measure 114 getting voted in and what that's looking like and all of these rapid changes while the public tries to adjust to what that means or get answers when there really aren't good ones out there right now.
So, I have to say from the outside looking in, from my perspective, that there's a couple of things that really strike me about this. First, again, I'm from California, and so there's a few other states in the union that operate similarly.
Right.
They're highly restricted and regulated. But the haste at which this thing got pushed through, Measure 114, and on the back end of as emotional as things get whenever there's some type of a tragedy or a highly politicized and tragic event, but how fast the troops were rallied to literally change law, which impact people and their Second Amendment rights. These are constitutional rights.
Absolutely.
And as fast as that happened was wild to me. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, just in sort of the timeline and how this happened.
That timeline is rough, to say the least. So this was pushed in, or attempting to be pushed in as quick as legally possible, because it was a citizen introduced ballot measure. So it can be enacted pretty rapidly. What we're starting to realize finally, or at least the people who are trying to implement and trying to get the infrastructure in place to handle this, is that there is no infrastructure in place for this. There's no even preliminary infrastructure in place for this. There's no statewide system. There are no systems for curriculum approval. There's no funding for this measure. There's no funding for local municipalities or for any local or county-based law enforcement to handle this. And so everyone seems to be scrambling at all different levels to try and figure out what they're doing, while everyone is independently trying to come up with an answer before this, 30-day deadline that has now elapsed. So it's pretty wild.
Sounds like a clusterfuck. Let's just pause for a second. So we've kind of given a little bit of perspective on kind of like, wow, this is kind of wild. Some stuff's going on. Let's talk about the measure itself and what exactly it is and how it impacts you, or let's just say how it impacts the citizens of Oregon, how it impacts you as a business owner, and how it impacts, ultimately, it's going to impact the infrastructure that you just mentioned is completely ill-equipped to deal with this new thing. And then I think there's obviously there's some things we can get into about how it has typically operated there and how this is going to be very disruptive and the reasons why. But maybe let's just talk about the measure to start. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so the measure itself, to be frank, I think was intentionally deceptive in its wording and in the way that it was shown on the ballots, because it would say things like it requires a background check to be completed before the purchase of a firearm, this sort of thing, which if you don't know what's going on or you're not familiar with firearms, that sounds great. We assume, yes, background checks are a good thing. We want those to be completed.
Was that already happening?
Yeah. So background checks, as you know, are required to purchase a firearm. There are no gun show loopholes. Private party transfer in the state of Oregon has required a background check on the purchaser since 2015 here, right?
So time out. So for people that don't know, that are listening, that don't quite understand this, if let's say you're a private citizen, right? Or I've got my buddy Joe. My buddy Joe wants to sell me a gun, or I want to buy a gun from Joe. I have to go through a certified dealer, an FFL. I have to come to you, and I have to you have to hold that gun. You have to fill out the paperwork. You have to submit that paperwork to the Department of Justice so that there's a background check done. All the information is taken in on both parties, the buyer and the seller, and the firearm that's being exchanged, how much it cost, or whatever the fees were in terms of exchange, much like a Department of Motor Vehicles would do, in terms of that. And then, is there a waiting period in Oregon like there's in California?
There's not a mandatory waiting period in Oregon, but in Oregon, we don't go through the FBI's national hotline to conduct background checks. We go through the Oregon State Police. And since summer of 2020, they've been so overloaded that the waiting period that it takes for them to get to and process that background check has been anywhere from 1 to almost 30 days.
Oh, wow. Okay. So they were very overwhelmed by that already, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. And now they're extremely overwhelmed.
Okay, so let's go back. So I just wanted to jump in there for people that may not quite be familiar with this process, that there is a background. People are not freely trading firearms and buying and selling firearms legally on the streets of Oregon. It takes somebody like you, a shop like Black Flag, to be able to basically facilitate that type of a sale. And so what's been happening effectively is like, that was going probably pretty smoothly, and then the rate of firearm sales went through the roof, and then also the new legislation in terms of how that had to happen bogged down the system, because you're bogged down Oregon's system to have that background check happen. Okay,
correct.
So moving forward, go back to the measure. So now that's what the history has been. Where are we now?
Yeah, so this measure is going to require, it's going to limit magazines to 10 rounds, right? So you cannot purchase magazines over 10 rounds in Oregon. You can still possess a magazine over 10 rounds if you had purchased it prior to this new law, right? However, if you get in trouble or get caught with it out in public or using it, it is a Class A misdemeanor, and it is considered an affirmative defense, which means you're going to have to go to court. You are guilty until proven innocent, and you must prove that you owned that magazine prior to the measure going into effect to get out of that misdemeanor. Just on magazines, by having and using something that you've owned for however long.
Is this considered a felony right out of the gate?
It's not. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it's a misdemeanor. So that's the magazine part of this,
just your
legislation
magazine capacity. Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then the permit to purchase is the other big issue here, right? And so that part of the measure, every person who wants to buy a firearm has to get a permit to purchase that firearm in the state of Oregon. In order to get that permit, you're going to have to take a class from law enforcement or from an NRA instructor that has curriculum that has been approved by law enforcement. And it must have a live fire portion of that training. So you have to go to a range and shoot. Firearm safety has to be part of that training, and suicide prevention has to be part of that training. And so those are all requirements just for someone to be able to teach that class that you have to take prior to applying for your permit.
So there is a step to be able to exercise your Second Amendment rights now, as stated by the state of Oregon. So if I want to go out and buy a firearm, It's more than just a background check. Am I a felon? Have I been convicted of a crime? Am I involved in any kind of adjudication at this point?
Right.
And all the things that would typically go on. Now now the state gets to tell me whether or not I'm okay to buy a firearm. And once they've done that, then I can go through this process, which would mean I have to go through this training, firearm safety training, from a quote unquote, air quotes here, certified body to be able to teach me how to do this properly before I could then go back to being approved to maybe buy a firearm.
Yeah. So if you then complete the training, right, you get your certificate. Now you can go and fill out, from what we've seen so far, you can go and fill out the Oregon State Police application for this. You can get signed off by your local or county law enforcement. You can get fingerprints done and then submit that application along with a fee of up to $65, according to the measure, to the state police to get your permit to purchase. And from then, you can then go and attempt to purchase a firearm.
So, obviously, this is very problematic. And I think we should uncover a few things. First, we already know the system's bogged down as it is, just in running background checks. Secondly, there is no such certification that exists out there, right or wrong?
Yeah, that's correct. So as of right now, there is no curriculum and no approved curriculum, and there are no approved instructors in the entire state. So if this law had gone into effect on the 8th, as it should have, before it was thankfully blocked for at least 10 days until the 13th, that means that the entire state of Oregon would have no method to purchase firearms.
This also, I have to imagine, there are plenty of people out there that are, based on what you've already said, are currently in the process of waiting to be approved from the background check perspective to get the firearms that they're already in the process of purchasing. And had they not met that deadline date, that basically cancels out all of these people that have these pending sales or pending purchases, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So right now, there are over 36,000 people attempting to purchase a firearm that are waiting in that queue for Oregon State Police. And if that law had gone into effect, Oregon State Police had stated that they would pause those background checks. They wouldn't cancel them, but they would not process them until that 36,000 people got training, got permits, and that, mind you, there's no system to get those permits. There's no way to approve those permits. And then somehow the dealers would upload those permits to these 36,000 background checks, of which there's no system for uploading that information.
I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist on the other end of this conversation to understand that this is all kinds of fucked up. And I'll just, not sorry, that's just what it is.
Call it what it is.
Let's call it what it is. Okay. So we have all these people out there that are pending. We have all the people out there that are like, I don't want to be caught in this situation. What is the last 2 to 4 weeks look like for you at the shop? I mean, tell me about, like, what does it look like? I mean, theoretically, business should be good, but at the same time, maybe I'm totally wrong.
Yeah. So on one hand, yes, business is good. There's been this massive spike in demand, and that's great, provided people can actually complete their purchases, right? Otherwise, you have local stores, so you could end up with a lot of local businesses purchasing a huge number of firearms to meet this demand, and then all of a sudden they can't sell them, and now mom and pop shops all over the state are having to shell out 6 months worth of their inventory in refunds because people cannot purchase those items.
Yeah, I've given you my money, but I can't have my gun. So just give me my money back. I'm moving on.
Correct. And that, along with this unknown time frame while the state gets this system in place, unfortunately, for a lot of your local businesses, that could tank them.
So I have to imagine too, I mean, man, what is the call volume that's coming into the store right now for like, hey man, what's going on? How do I do this? Like, I've never purchased a gun before, but I see like I probably should now because I'm not going to get it. Or I have questions, I'm a gun owner. I haven't bought one in a couple of years or in a few months. Like, what should I expect when I come down there? What's the process? Where can I go for more information? how much of your time is being taken up just answering basic questions that, quite frankly, you probably don't have the answers for?
Right. Yeah. So the call volume's been insane. We've been fielding an average of 12 to 1,300 incoming calls per day.
What?
And we just can't
wait, time out. 12 to 1,300 calls.
Yes. So we run 3 phone lines, and there's almost all day long someone on at least 1 or 2 of those, and we just miss the majority of calls. Thankfully, we have software that helps us go back through and send messages to people through all of our social and all that. So that's been helpful. But man, I cannot tell you the number of people that have been like, I've been calling for days, or like, I can't get through to you, or you open, like this kind of thing.
Right.
And I'm sure it's that way for everyone right now.
How frustrating as a business owner and as a consumer, especially if it's, a regular consumer. I mean, you have a community of people, right? I mean, how long has Black Flag been around there in Medford?
We're almost 8 years old now.
Is that right? Okay. So you have an established clientele there that's been, purchasing and asking you questions and feeling you probably have a lot of personal relationships with people. And this is going to get challenged, as people are looking. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of those people are like, hey, John, there's things I want to do, and I recognize there's a tight timeline. How can you help me here? Right. You're probably going home at night, not sleeping very much, getting up early, going back to the next day and getting buried under phone calls, paperwork, phone messages.
Yeah.
And so the question I would ask is like, with all that incoming that's going on, how much incoming from an informational perspective? So those are the questions. So it has to be outgoing on your end, but the incoming end, talk to me about what's happening from a state perspective, like from let's say the authorities, from the state level all the way down to the local, municipalities. How much communication is happening, and how is it happening, if it is, for you to kind of stay on top of this and understand what's going on so that you can communicate effectively with the citizens of the state that you live in, that you're there to service, and obviously the direct customers that you're dealing with on a daily basis?
Yeah. So I got to preface what I'll say about that with my industry investigator with the ATF is great. She's done a fantastic job for us, and our local law enforcement is fantastic. The downside is, from the state level, there's been zero communication. The state has posted about 3 updates on their website, and then it's left to dealers to try and interpret that. Unfortunately, the ATF has not gotten accurate information from the state of Oregon.
You don't say.
And so they refer us to the state attorney general. The state attorney general will tell dealers that they cannot offer legal advice to any outside entities. They tell us that they cannot offer legal advice to our attorneys. And so we're out here asking local law enforcement, hey, what have you guys heard? Do you know what's going on? Please keep us in the loop. And then asking, we spend a lot of time reading everything that comes out, and reading these measures ourselves, and then handing off questions to attorneys and saying, well, what's your best guess? Because the people responsible for enforcing this have no idea.
Oh, man. I mean, again, going back to the term clusterfuck, so you put everybody in a bad position here. So let's go back to the attorney general. And, and what I opened this up with, or what we opened this up with, which was the haste in which this measure got rolled out and how it got rolled out and the position that it left people in. And I want to start with the citizens of Oregon. I could be wrong, but my opinion would be that the state attorneys general or state attorney general's job is to look out for the best interest of the citizens of the state with regard to their constitutional and legal rights within their own state, because things vary from state to state, obviously, but we have some constitutional rights. And their job is not to make law. Their job is to uphold the laws that exist. And all of a sudden, we've passed this measure, which is now being placed into law. And in the process of doing that, what you've done is you're literally standing in the way of the rights of the citizens to do what they need to do. I mean, there's 2 big problems here, right? One, am I going to be able to get a gun, right? Am I going to even be able to purchase a gun? Because there's no way to process this, as you've already articulated. And my rights as a citizen of the United States is I need to have a pathway to get a firearm. It is guaranteed to me, right? So right now they have taken away that guarantee. Number one. Number two, I guess the way I'm looking at it is like, okay, so you want me to do a background check and you need to get this part handled for me, but you can't even do that effectively and efficiently right now. And yet we've moved on to yet another step. And I don't want to get into the 10-round magazine thing. We can cover that in a minute. But
Right.
My challenge is as an attorney general, if those are and again, this is just me. I'm just a dude, kind of looking at it from the outside looking in. You are being negligent. You are playing with the very, very specific rights that we've had for almost 250 years now. That while there is a lot of stuff moving around the country and things that are legislation is trying to be passed at the federal level, state levels, municipal levels across the country, you just stepped into a steaming pile of what, because it's one thing to be able to say we've passed legislation and this is what we're going to do. It's a whole other deal in terms of implementing it and then not being in a position to monitor or deal with it at any level whatsoever. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, and maybe what you're hearing from your clients, where you're hearing from local officials, things like that, in terms of their perception of this whole thing.
I mean, my opinion on that is fairly simple, and that is that the push to get this in place and to enact and implement this law before the systems required and the infrastructure required to do it smoothly and effectively are in place is willfully blocking the constitutional rights of the people of the state of Oregon.
Like, what's going on. You know what you're doing.
Yes. You absolutely know the legal implications of it. You absolutely know that you are attempting to make a situation in which Oregonians have no method to legally purchase a firearm, which, mind you, opens up and encourages private party transfers without background checks and black markets of firearms.
Yeah, whole
right?
Ball
When
game.
you make it not more difficult, but literally impossible for a time period for people to purchase firearms legally. So I'm hard pressed to say that it is ignorance and not willful determination to enact this as rapidly as possible, knowing the harmful implications.
Oh, I think you're handling this really delicately and professionally, man. I mean, you either know, and you're doing it anyway, or you are that out of touch with reality that you're doing it, and you're standing behind I didn't really realize this, which is, I actually think the first part is almost acceptable, because I've almost begun to like expect that from a good level, a good level of politicians that are out there. Mm-hmm. The ignorance piece, inexcusable, totally inexcusable. Yeah. I mean, what am I? I can sit here and gripe and I can complain about it, and I live in a state where we've been dealing with some of this ridiculousness for quite some time. But what I have to say is nothing has been done in a timeline like what I've seen this happen, which shocks me. And that, to your point, like, basically, this is impossible to do right now. Mm-hmm. And you're hell-bent on implementing it before the end of the year. Like right now, all of a sudden, December 8th. I mean, this thing passed only like 2 months ago? November.
The vote was a month prior to when it
been enacted. So not even that. Yeah, not even that. It's like, we're just going to turn this on. Like, this is what we're doing now.
Right. And I mean, that'd be amazing, but I have never seen the government be that fast at really much of anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're not really known for efficiency. That is for sure. Yeah. Big surprise. So I wonder, maybe you could share, you mentioned, and I appreciate this, by the way, that your contact with the ATF and the people that you deal with have been very, very supportive and trying to help you the best they can.
Yeah.
And local law enforcement has been outstanding. I wonder if you could talk to that a little bit, and just sort of how they're trying to communicate with you so that you can do a good job in communicating with the people that they're sworn to protect and serve. Mm-hmm. What's been the basic communication? Like, how are they handling this?
Yeah. So our chief law enforcement in the area, right, is the Jackson County Sheriff, where we are specifically. And they were among the first to say that they have no interest in dedicating resources to enforce this magazine ban, that this is not a good thing and it is not a good use of law enforcement resources, which is fantastic. Our Sheriff Nate Sickler. So they've been proactive in saying and trying to find options for themselves, for local law enforcement, so city to city, or for private instructors to get approved ASAP, so that if this thing does truly go into effect, people can at least get classes and get that permit process rolling.
Right. I think that's good to hear. That, hey, look, we don't know what's going to happen, but we're doing the best we can on our end to make sure that the pieces are in place from what we may be able to influence, not necessarily control, but influence. I wonder what are the conversations that you're having with the the person that you, or the customer that you've been dealing with for a long time, that's an avid 2A advocate that is out practicing training on a regular basis, hunting, taking their family out to do different events or whatever, and get together, which may often involve the use of firearms and things like that. The community, man, how are they reacting to this?
So avid shooters in the shooting community, they're not as worried about the permit to purchase thing right off the bat. They own firearms. They are out shooting, right? The magazine capacity thing is a big deal. They absolutely do not like this. So rather than having a true registration of firearms in the state, we now have this kind of de facto registration and this list of these are your firearm owners in the state. And a lot of them don't want to get on that list necessarily. They don't believe that that is an overreach of the government's authority and power. And for them, that's, well, maybe I won't be able to purchase any more firearms in the future.
So I can speak to that, I think, from a personal perspective, because it's been at this point exposed that our Attorney General purposely released the entire list of all of the registered gun owners in the state of California.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it at this point. It was purposeful. There's not even a question about any of this. If for a period of time, there's a short period of time, doesn't matter. As long as that list is out there, it's forever. It's been captured. Every registered gun owner in the United States, or excuse me, in the state of California, has been exposed.
And that
right?
is,
Or excuse me, not registered gun owner, concealed carry weapons permit owner, has been exposed. Those are people that have very sensitive information. These are law enforcement officers, family, wives, siblings, spouses of law enforcement officers, for people that have an axe to grind, that have something to hold against these people that are in prison for the rest of their lives or for long periods of time, now have access to this, and all we got was basically an apology. And it's like, oh, sorry, we messed up. Not excusable, right?
No,
not excusable, and not acceptable, not at any level ever. So I think when I'm I can relate. I in talking with people that that have very strong opinions about all of this. I think the thing is like, look, we can't trust the entities. Like, I want to be a law-abiding gun owner. I want to exercise my Second Amendment rights. But I realize in order for me to do that, in order for me to do that and for others to do that, there may need to be some things that we need to look at a little harder or a little bit more critically. With regard to what are the things we may need to implement, or what are the things we may need to explore, or at least be open to make sure that these things don't get into the hands of the wrong people.
Right.
Here's the thing at the end of the day. We already have those laws.
We do.
We already have, specifically in California, we already have those laws. They exist.
Yeah.
So, to say that we need these new things out there to stop whatever quote unquote gun violence is happening, and whatever the powers to be think this type of legislation is going to change or encourage differently from a behavior perspective. we haven't even begun to enforce the laws that actually exist. And if we had done that, then we wouldn't have to worry about it. Maybe. We don't know, because you don't enforce those laws. And then two, on the flip side of all this, you're exposing people's your personal information. You're basically telling those bad guys where all the guns are, in releasing this type of information. So I, from a California perspective, from a citizen's perspective, I fully feel for the people up there that are very, very cautious and at this point distrustful of the government, which is effectively not trustworthy. Again, time and time again, with regard to personal information. So, John, I was just, I guess, giving my piece on the distrust factor with regard to privacy issues. So maybe you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah. So I have that conversation very similarly a lot when I talk to people about bumper stickers on their cars, right? When you put a bunch of gun stickers on your car, you're basically advertising, hey, break into my car if you want to probably get a gun. Like, how much worse is it when we put out a shopping list of people's names, homes that own firearms, especially when it's a lot of law enforcement people that go as far as having protected addresses on their IDs when you just throw their home address and, hey, this person has guns. Like, it's completely inexcusable.
Yeah, again, like I said, I mean, we've been dealing with that here. There's a lot of concern about that, and that list is out there. So it went out. So I think that's a legit concern.
It is.
As we're going down through it, and again, you've got now what you have is you've got an overwhelmed system with regard just to background checks.
Right.
So at anytime you get anything is overwhelmed with too much volume, not enough resources, and confusion and poor communication, there is risk of exposure, and in many, many different ways. And there's also frustration that happens with that for the people that are having to deal with it, whether that's on the giving or the receiving side. And I think that sets us up for bad things down the road. Maybe we just move a little bit into the 10 round magazine thing. So this is new for you.
It is.
And I wonder how you're dealing with it. And I wonder how the folks up there in Oregon are dealing with this and trying to make sense of the whole thing. Like, obviously, there are many, many different manufacturers that make many different types of magazines that fit their many different types of firearms.
Right.
And 10 rounds was like an old school type of, it really goes back to a higher pistol caliber type,
right.
Firearms and whatnot. So maybe talk a little bit about kind of how this has hit you and your take on it.
Yeah, man. The 10 round.
I love how this is starting, by the way.
The logic behind the 10 round thing is mind blowing. And you can see this even in the hearings that happened last Friday. You can see it in the, state to state where this is enacted. We say we need 10 round magazines so that when mass shootings happen, this person's going to have to pause to reload, which to anyone in the firearms community or anyone who's trained, owned guns, used guns, that's an absurd argument.
It's comical. It's completely comical.
Laughable, right? And so your listeners, and for the most part, like, we don't need to necessarily dive into that argument. But the other side of this is where, when the FBI made the switch from 40 to 9 mil, one of the reasons that they did that was for higher capacity, because on their data, based on the number of misses and how many rounds it was taking to subdue attackers, they decided that a lower recoil, higher capacity was what was needed for law enforcement, right? And so we're going to go out there and say that standard people, right, which we would assume, or, common knowledge says has less training than our law enforcement, right? We're going to assume that under a high stress situation, which many people have never experienced in their life, that person is going to outperform law enforcement and the FBI's agents, and that they don't need higher capacity than 10 rounds. That kind of limitation is completely arbitrary. It's based on poor logic. And at best, I mean, it's nonsense. And at worst, it is going to cost innocent lives because people cannot continue to defend themselves under a high stress situation. And that's rough.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's a major point. I think it's always boiled down to the logic, whether we're talking about pistol braces or 10-round mags,
Right.
or anything for that matter. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It is all talk. It's an illusion. It is rhetoric, and it is being the thing I think that probably bothers me the most about it, outside of it being ridiculous to even listen to. If you
Right.
know even the first thing about the things that you've just articulated, is that it's being espoused at the highest level of government, at the highest level of representation for municipalities, states, and ultimately our federal government. It drives me bonkers. I don't get angry about it anymore. As you said, it's laughable.
Right.
I chuckle about it, but at the same time, it's impacting us. I mean, look at where we're at. I mean, we're still reducing it, and the whole premise behind it is to reduce the level of quote unquote gun violence that happens, and more specifically, death. So I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is like 50. I could just talk specifically about California. I think it's as many as, when I say this, it's between 52 and 54, and I know I'm not wrong about this. I mean, this is what the state's reporting, as well as the FBI. 52 to 54% of the total number of deaths that happen by firearms in the state of California are suicides. It doesn't, I don't care whether you got a 10 round, 15 round, 30 round drum mag in the gun. How many rounds does it take to commit suicide?
It's one.
The
instances
right?
in
That's
which is
54%.
Yeah.
That's better than half of the total deaths. Now, I'm not, again, so now we could move into mass shootings and we could talk about what that really means and what that really looks like. But at the end of the day, if you have, let's say, as many as 2,500 deaths by firearm in the state of California, 54% of those are 52 to 54% of those are happening by suicide. 10-round or magazine restrictions don't change anything.
No,
they don't. They hardly they don't change anything.
Magazine restrictions won't do anything to change that, and gun legislation will not do anything to change that. Right?
That's facts.
Education and mental health services are the only thing that's going to change that statistic, and it's just completely ignored by the anti-gun side of it.
Yeah, which brings us back to the haste at which this thing got passed, right? In Oregon, and how fast it came to fruition, and now where we're sitting with it, it happened so fast, and it, I mean, just accelerated so quickly that now we're in a situation where it can't even be implemented. There's just no way to do this right now. So, I mean, you've articulated a lot with regard to, how it's kind of impacted people, how it's impacting you. I wonder if you can talk about, and I know you have to be careful, this is a delicate conversation, if you can talk about how people are sort of handling this from a mindset perspective. And, what does this mean for them? Let's just say, the state could get this worked out tomorrow. And you already mentioned the propensity for this to create non-legal firearms transfers, in the state. I wonder if, in just talking with people, or what you're hearing people say, what their mindset is about this, and where that puts them on the path to, I really want to be a law-abiding citizen here, but they're making it really tough for me to do that in a lot of ways. And I may have to take another look at how I practice, my what laws I decide or not decide to follow.
Right.
Can you talk to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We're in a great position as a shop. Like, we have a fantastic clientele, and we're in this position where we've kind of cultivated the type of people that we work with, and 99% of the people that we deal with in the shop and Black Flag as a whole are law-abiding citizens that want to follow the law, and they want to do whatever they can to be within the law, right? And so just listening to conversations here in the shop and what gets told to us 1,000 times a day, or the messages we get, or the phone calls we get, a lot of people's sentiment is, I want to get this before I can't. Not that they won't ever be able to get the permit or this or that. It's they don't want to be on a list, and they're not sure that the state is going to have the ability to actually accomplish this in any kind of timely fashion. So they go, I want to get this before I can't. And we even see a lot of new gun owners entering this going, oh man, I should buy a firearm before this goes into effect and I can't. And
Right.
then we see people then go, I'm going to stock up on magazines because I'm never going to get those again here. And we see people say, I need to go buy receivers so I can build some firearms, or I need to buy 80% receivers so I can go buy
Right.
firearms. And that's
Right.
that is your law-abiding, person. Like, that is the average law-abiding citizen and firearm owner here. So when you get out of kind of our clientele, or you get to people who are more on the fringe of whether I want to abide by these laws or not, right? They're going to go for any black market gun they can get, which unfortunately is going to be private sales without transfers or without background checks taking place now. Because
it works the opposite of
hard.
what the legislation was there to enforce in the first place. And again, we already know bad guys don't follow gun laws. They never have, and they're never going to.
No, if that were the case, we'd make murder illegal. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, that's so well placed, man. Like, murder, by the way, is illegal. And bad guys don't care about that. They're going to do what they want to do. But I think when you start messing with people's constitutional rights to the effect where you've got a person that really wants to, this is a U.S. citizen who prides themselves on being an American and
Yes.
respects the rights that they have and that others have, their neighbors, their community, the people around them. And they want people to want to be a part of that, right? And now you're putting them in a position to ask themselves questions about and question their own integrity specific to the laws that they're now being forced on them. These are law-abiding citizens. These are not anybody that's broken the law, and they had no intention of breaking the law. And they're not sitting around, conniving and rubbing their hands together and in these
what can I do today?
Right, exactly. In these conspiracy groups of like, hey, how can we fuck the government, and how can I get away with this, or how can I get away with that? They're being forced into a conversation that starts probably in their own head about, this doesn't seem right to me, and I'm not sure how I'm going to handle this. But when you're forced into a corner, like you end up making decisions that you might not necessarily have made if you'd not been forced into that corner. And so I'm going to answer my own question to a certain extent. And I want to be very clear about what I'm about to say, which is not what I hear you saying, but this is what I've seen as a Californian in an active member of the 2A community within California, with a lot of law-abiding citizens, which include a lot of people that have been charged with and sworn an oath in order to uphold the same laws that are trying to be pushed in the state that you have. And that is, first off, I am not going to be saddled with the basically this stigma that I am a criminal because I have something that's in my safe that I bought 10 years ago, or I go out and I practice and I train on the range with something on a regular basis that I'm fully aware of how it works, how to operate it, stay safe with it, and so forth. I am not going to burden myself with or saddle myself with the title of felon or lawbreaker. I'm just not going to do that anymore. You've done that. I haven't accepted that. So I'm going to continue on my life and the path that I've gone on, that I've been doing up to this point, in the way that I have, and I'm going to feel good about it. I'm going to be quiet. I'm not going to make a lot of noise. I'm not going to, get out there and stand on the corner with signs saying, this is fucked. But I've got to do what I have to do, and that is protect that is protect my rights as I see them by the Constitution of the United States. irrespective of what one county in the state of Oregon, in your case, has really influenced. When we look at Multnomah County, I mean, mental
Oh
health,
yeah.
mental health, crime, drugs, you name it. Like it is. I happen to be familiar with there. I used to go there quite a bit for business. When I say quite a bit, I was there at least 3 times a month for
Yeah.
days on end. I don't want to go to Portland anymore, man. I don't
No,
want to go up there. I've
same.
traveled to many other metropolitan cities in the last couple of years, and that's just not a place I want to spend any time. Unfortunately, I used to love going there, but the population, the way the legislative system works, they have a big say in what's going on. It
Oh yeah.
just like major metropolitan areas here, San Francisco, the Silicon Valley, San Jose, Santa Clara County, Los Angeles County. Those are the very influential areas that can get real emotional one day, get a bill to pass, and then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, the rest of us law-abiding citizens that are in the state that really couldn't control or influence any of that at all, are all of a sudden
Mhm.
sitting in a position where we're now made criminals
Yep.
for no other reason than because which you didn't like something for which you're totally uninformed of, by the
Yeah.
way,
Oh yeah.
have now put us in the situation. So you should not be surprised that I'm a little pissed off about this, and that
Mhm.
I'm even in a mind frame, me, not John, me sitting here going, you know what? I don't think I'm going to follow that law, and I'm going to
Yeah.
take the risk
And that,
because I am not breaking any laws in my mind. I have not done anything. I am not a criminal. I am a law-abiding citizen, and I would not be surprised if there is a large part of the population, and there are certain factions in the state of Oregon that are thinking the exact same way right now, and are just going, we're going to do what we got to do. And where there's a will, there's a way. And I never, ever thought I would be in a situation where I'd be breaking the law, but you put me in this position now. And so I may or may not have to do that. I'm not saying I am, but I'm not saying I'm not. I don't,
yeah.
I don't know, man.
Absolutely. And that's one of the big problems with laws like this, especially like with the magazine ban type thing, right? With your 10 round capacities, is it drives people to have exactly those mental conversations. And unfortunately, to make those choices, people that would never want to break laws are now questioning whether or not the law that's being imposed on them is a just one or not, and whether or not it should be followed. And when you have counties and your chief law enforcement officers of counties and the sheriff's association for the state saying things like, we don't believe in this law, we're not going to enforce it, it drives and reinforces those mental conversations. When there's no exception in these bills for law enforcement, right? So now we have law enforcement officers that when they go off duty, if they don't swap out to 10 round mags, they're criminals. Like,
It's wild. It's wild. And so
crazy.
I mean, the other thing I would say about that is if I'm having to question this in my head, this makes me angry. And so it's divisive
It
is what
is.
it is. Like what you're doing is you're forcing people to make decisions that they don't want to make. You're backing them into a corner.
Mhm.
And by backing them into a corner, you've put them on the defensive. And by putting them on the defensive, they've had to take a side. And rather than be a little bit more, maybe more objective about the decision making, and then maybe a little bit more tolerant about, hey, I understand that you might not understand this. And that's okay. You don't necessarily need to. I really want to try to explain it to you, and I want to, give you my piece. But now what it ends up being is like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it. And if you do, just be prepared for the deep-rooted anger and resentment that I have for even having to have this conversation, which in my mind, I shouldn't have to have because of what the second thing that they wrote
Right.
in the Constitution
Yeah.
actually
And it
says.
is, it's divisive. I mean, the fact that you say it is divisive is very, very important, right? I think in a lot of ways, right, and this is my personal opinion, right, I think that it is intentionally divisive. I believe that this sort of thing is intentionally divisive in order to drive certain political ideologies further apart so that we can have this divisiveness and this divide in America where that's not the way we see people acting, person to person, me to you, me to my neighbor. That's not how we see them acting, right? We can back up 2 years and we look at the beginning of all of the COVID stuff and we look at civil unrest. And what do Americans do? Law abiding, American citizens exercise, many for the first time, like an insane number of people for the first time, exercise their Second Amendment rights to defend themselves. They say, oh my God, this is uncertain. I don't know what's going to happen. I need to be responsible for myself, my family, and my own well-being. And so then they exercise their Second Amendment rights, right? And so when we try to divide these categories and say that firearms owners are crazy, they're these ultra white, right-wing, whatever, versus these are normal, sane people, that is not reality. That's just not the reality of the average American citizen. The average American citizen is someone who wants to follow the law and who wants to be self-reliant and self-responsible, not what's being painted with laws like this that cause this division. Just
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's ultra frustrating, and it keeps me up at night, man. I got to be honest. Like, I think about it, and I've been painted as a weirdo, right? Like, you're crazy, you're dangerous. You know, as a citizen, you have guns and you shoot things, and you know, you train to fight. I don't do any of those things, man. I train so I don't have to fight. And God forbid I should ever have to be in a situation where I have to use my firearm. I just want to be a responsible citizen, know how to use it, and be accountable for every round that comes out of it.
Absolutely.
That's really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to. And again, I could not agree with you more with regard to the divisiveness that these things create. And it is intentional. There's no doubt about it at this point. And the intention, I think, comes from, like, we need to change people's minds, and that coming from those that are pressing these laws and pressing these things. We need to change people's minds about them. Yet the minds that the ideas or the idealism that this is coming from it's not rooted in a solid foundation. It is really rooted in emotion and a lot of confusion.
Very much.
And that, to me, that makes me sad. It saddens me, but it also, at the same time, it angers me. So going back to, like, kind of how you handle this and where you go, I think some of the other things that we can take away from this are, you know, when people from other states are looking at kind of the what they might relate to, again, and when I say other states, like 2A advocates, or, you know, people that are more constitutionalists at that level, they're looking at what's happening in states like California, Washington, Oregon, New Jersey, New York City, those places, and going, oh man, those places are just fucked. You know, they just, those people are just weirdos out there, and they're you know, those places should just go away. They need to fall off into the Pacific Ocean and float away or whatever. I look at it and I go, and I've said this before on the show, look, this shit's cancerous. And once it starts to pick up a little bit of momentum, I mean, for anybody that's paying attention to any of this at all, they can see that this is a groundswell of right now of legislation where where those rights that we have been guaranteed are slowly being taken away. And it's not about a what if at this point. It's a when.
Yeah, it's when and how.
Because for years my buddies were telling me, hey, just come up to Oregon, man. It's so much better up here. We have so much more freedom. I'm going, now you're looking a little bit more, you're way more, if this thing goes through, man, this is way different than California.
It is.
We don't have to get a permit to own a gun.
Yeah.
We might have to have a permit to carry a gun concealed out on the street. Again, there's a lot of questions about that. Like, how many people are actually abiding by that? These are law-abiding citizens have been like, you won't give me one, so I'm just going to do it anyways. But that said, like, now you have to literally have a permit to own a gun. And what does that do to, you know, again, firearm sales, quote unquote, illegal transfer of firearms or whatnot? I think it creates the opposite of what they're trying to create.
It absolutely does. Yeah, it discourages anybody who's on the fence about acquiring firearms for the first time, for people who have already had them. It encourages you to go the easy route because it's been made currently impossible, right? If this were to go into effect today.
It is.
On the 8th. It would be actually impossible, right? But you encourage people to do the wrong thing. It is incentivizing illegal transfer and illegal private sale over doing the right thing because of the difficulties being introduced.
Yeah, John, man,
which is wild.
it is wild. Again, there are entities and positions, attorney general, ATF, things like that are there to enforce the laws that we already have,
Mm-hmm.
so that we protect citizens and we protect their rights. And this just seems so far off, and I can't imagine again how frustrating this is for you. However, I think I can kind of relate with regard to
Yeah.
some of the stuff that's happened. I mean, I've talked about this with other folks on this podcast before in terms of some of the things that have come out of the city of San Jose and what they're trying to implement from a, let's just say, a legislative perspective to demand that gun owners have insurance policies and donate to nonprofit organizations to regulate those insurance policies and things like that. Just going, what are you doing? There are
Wow.
there are so many other things that we could be addressing here. You mentioned the mental health issue. I mentioned the drug issue. The things that are happening in some of these major cities. And my again, the people that end up influencing these types of laws, they're the same people that need to clean up their own fucking houses first. Like, get your house in order and then demand that everybody else do stuff. Because if you've got problems in your own city, you need to address those first. And again, going back to Multnomah County, I've done the research. Look at the numbers, right? That's where all the shit is happening. And now you're impacting people that live throughout the rest of the state, whether it be rurally and in other cities. That I think Salem is a big part of this. Obviously, the state capital and
Right.
what's happening there, but they're a big part of this too. But if you look at the rest of the state, like, this is not a problem here. You have a problem. We, the people, do not have a problem. You've got a problem there, and the people that you are have been voted in to protect, serve, and serve. Let's just put it that way. They have a problem, and you're not serving them. You're punishing the others. And that's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
So as a business owner and as a citizen and as a gun advocate and a recreational, shooter and all those things, man, I think I can feel for you. But I don't know that I know what it feels like to have something just slammed in the side of my face as fast as you guys have had it slammed in front of yours.
Yeah. What it feels like is just backwards in so many ways. Because, I mean, we've gone here in Oregon, right? We've decriminalized the use of recreational use or whatever of hard drugs. It's a citation now in most cases.
Same here.
And then we're going this route on magazines. And one of the things that stuck out to me, a recent conversation that I had, was someone points out it is less of a crime, right, to smoke meth in a car with an infant than it is to have 12 rounds in your gun. Which
insanity.
Feels absolutely insane to think that that's not just where society's at here, or like this is a societal problem, but to think that that was reinforced by legislation and by the people who are supposed to be helping citizens and, like you say, protect and serve and to uphold the Constitution. To think that that's where we're at in our legal system is, smoke a little meth, like with your infant in the car. It's cool. You'll get a ticket, maybe. You better not have 12 rounds in that mag.
Look, man, I opened up this conversation with you off air with like, hey, I really want to be productive in this conversation and not make it a gripe and a bitch session. And
right.
I don't think we've got there. I think what it is it's a bringing to light of the reality of the things that we're faced with. And when I say both, I mean both of us in different states, but that involves an entire community of people. And more importantly, it involves the American people.
It does.
And the American people are afforded certain rights to do certain things, and there are other people that are continually fighting those things for personal and political agendas. There is some victimization that I believe is happening in Oregon, and I never, ever take the position of the victim. But at the same time, like, these are things that are outside of your control, and that the community's control of the people that you work with on a daily basis. And it just goes to show how much how important it is for us to stick together as a community, I think, to be able to have these conversations. And this is what I get from you, man. Like, so articulate, so calm, collected, cool, and informed. Probably informed more than a lot of the people around you, and I'm sure you're a pillar for the community that you support and are a part of. And I commend you for that, man.
Thank you.
There needs to be more people like this out there, and I wish when the shit hits the fan and there's some fucking shooting or some tragic event where some shitbag goes out and finds a target rich environment that they can take advantage of, instead of interviewing the local politician so they can stand up there in the pulpit to espouse their political agenda, that they would interview people like you to where we could provide some reality and some morality, for that matter, to the situation. I cannot thank you enough for coming on tonight and sharing your thoughts, and for the information you're being able to bring to the table. I think there's probably a lot of people out there that this is what I can say, and sort of as we close this up, is there's so much happening right now. It's so overwhelming. And
Oh
I
yeah.
believe that's part of the agenda, going back to what you think has been purposeful.
Hmm.
I think that's part of the agenda. If we can just keep this thing just burying people and information and litigation and new laws and new mandates and new things like that, they won't be able to keep up with it, and we can fatigue them and we can
Yeah.
wear them out. And the message that I would give to people is we can't let them do that, man. We can't. We can't sit and let politicians think that they can wear us out over time and pass these things or do things that effectively take away our rights as citizens. And to an extent, we've let them do that. And when I say
Hmm.
we, air quotes, I mean the collective we, despite the voting, despite how active you might be in the community or whatever else. So again, I guess my point of this is like we have to stick together here. I wonder what your closing thoughts are, and your, if you had to leave people with stuff today, particularly your Oregon counterparts.
Right.
What would you say, man? How would you close up?
I mean, I would encourage people to, in Oregon, I think, to stick together and to really work and be vigilant at safeguarding our rights as Americans and our rights as citizens in order to be self-reliant and be self-sufficient and to take care of ourselves. And the First Amendment and the Second Amendment are huge parts of that, right? And so being vigilant in this and being not aggressive, but being constantly on the
Mm,
watch for this overwhelming information, overwhelming change, or societal changes that are being forced constantly to try and make self reliance or my desire to have the ability to take care of myself and my family and defend myself and family seem outrageous,
hmm.
to be on the guard against that. And as far as this Measure 114 goes, I would encourage people to keep fighting against it, to keep filing suit, and to keep challenging it, and really just try and back this thing out of here before it becomes permanent.
Yeah, man, I feel you. And if it, I'm with you. I think there's a lot of people down here in the south of the border of Oregon that are in your camp, man. That'll support you 100% and want to. Maybe not being sure how to do that, or where to go or what to do.
Hmm.
If they want to find out more about Black Flag, if they want to find out more about you and kind of what's going on up there, and support the efforts that you're making, but also your business, at the end of the day, in your community, where should they go? How do they do that?
Yeah, so we're fairly active on social. We're Black Flag Armory almost everywhere. Our website is blackflagarms.com. You can find us there. Um, I wouldn't recommend trying to call us right now because good luck getting through. But we're really responsive through email and messages and things. That's always a great place to grab us and just get our attention. But if you're around, swing by the shop, come talk with us. It's always a good way.
So that said, in the last year or so, we got connected through our boy Pranay,
Right.
good friend, both of us right now, firefighter down here in the state of California and
Hmm.
resident of Oregon, and he's been a huge advocate for your business, and I know you've been a huge advocate for him as a shooter and a, a 2A activist.
Yeah.
Whenever I come up to Oregon, I always the last time I headed up, it's always through like Central, because I'm always kind of headed up to the Bend area with the mountain bike and the fishing
Yeah.
poles and whatever else.
Yeah.
And then the last summer I came back down through the coast, so I cut all the way across and we came down the coastline back into
Hmm.
California. My goal is to get up there and visit you guys there in Medford and maybe get out. Let's get some training time in, man. Let's
Yeah.
go out and with some greater than 10 round capacity magazines and
Absolutely.
and have a good time. And then maybe when we're done, we can go out to get some dinner, some steaks and some cigars or something like that, man.
Yeah. That
I
would be
appreciate the
awesome.
time that you've given us, bud. And what you're doing up there. I think we need more people like you. I think there's a lot of people in Oregon right now that appreciate what you're doing and will appreciate the message that you're bringing. And I'm hoping that they'll get that from this podcast. So reach out to John at Black Flag Armory. And John, thank you so much for your time and best of luck to you. I'll come up there and visit you soon, man. Like, I feel like I owe that to you and I owe the shop
Anytime.
that. And I really want to meet the people you work with and the folks that you hang around. So
Yeah.
again, thanks
Love to
very
have you,
much, man.
Scott. Yeah. Thank you.